Start in 1 minute. All right, let's start. Hope the rest will connect. And if not, just watch these videos will be placed on YouTube. Later on, you'll be able to watch it. Okay, so we have just said about the process which was continued with the initial open market operation when the Fed places $100,000 in the reserves of one bank, and this bank decided to not to keep these reserves in the Fed, but to start the normal business, normal banking operations by providing loans. And these loans were provided for the first customer. This first customer uses the second bank by placing the check. The second bank provided the loan, and so on and so forth, until we stopped at some point, and the increase in reserves reached 100,000. So this is the iterative process. The ratio of the amount of deposits created by banks to the amount of new reserves created is called simple deposit multiplier. In this case, the simple deposit multiplier equals to 1 million or 100,000. So it is 10. Why 10? Because we can calculate it with the expression. We can have the infinite row 1 plus 0.9 plus 0.9 to the power of 2, 3, and so on and so forth. And we can reduce this row by just simple algebra with 1 over 1 minus 0.9, and this equals to 10. So delta D equals to 100,000 times 10, it is 1 million. Note that 10 is 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. So this RRT is the required reserve ratio, and simple deposit multiplier is 1 over RRT. This approach gives us another way of expressing the simple deposit multiplier with this equation 1 over RRT. And we have an equation showing how a change in deposits delta D is related to an initial change in reserves delta R. And we have this delta D is delta R over RRD. So this is the another equation of understanding what for in case of our example, it will be again 1 million. If a bank decides to invest all or some of its excess reserves in municipal bonds or other securities rather than make loans, the deposit expansion process will be the same as if the bank had made loans. So suppose that PNC, the first bank in line, decides to purchase 90,000 worth of municipal bonds from a bond dealer instead of extending the $90,000 loan to their customer, Santiago. PNC would write the bond dealer a check in the amount of 90,000, which Goldman Sachs would deposit in its bank. The dealer's bank would then have excess reserves, which it could lend or invest, and so on and so forth. So the effect on multiple deposit creation is the same whether banks use excess reserves to make loans or buy securities. At first, you might think that individual banks are creating money. However, an individual bank can lend only an amount equal to its excess reserves. New deposits are created when borrowers spend the funds they borrow from banks, and the funds are then deposited back into the banking system. Multiple deposit creation refers to the actions of the banking system as a whole, not the action of an individual bank. Finally, note that just as the Fed can expand the volume of checkable deposits in the banking system by increasing the reserves, it can also contract the volume of deposits by reducing reserves. And the Fed reduces reserves by selling government securities in open market sale. This action has a ripple effect that is similar to deposit expansion. Okay, so initially we have multiple deposit creation, and if the bank, if the Fed goes in the opposite direction, it sells $100,000 securities in Wells Fargo. Then that means if it sells, it reduces the bank's reserves by 100,000, and the simple deposit multiplier is 10. We know that a decline in the reserves of 100,000 will eventually lead to a decline in checkable deposits of $1 million. So this will be called as multiple deposit contraction, not creation, in the opposite way, right? Okay, so next topic. Next topic is bank and non-bank public affect the money multiplier. Okay, understanding the simple deposit multiplier is an important step in understanding money supply process, but it is not the complete story. In deriving the simple deposit multiplier, we made two key assumptions. Banks hold no excess reserves, and the non-bank public does not increase its holdings in currency. What do we mean? We assumed that whether banks have excess reserves, they lend them all out. We also assume that if households or firms receive a check, they deposit the whole amount in the checking account, keeping none of the funds in cash. So this is neither of these assumptions is correct. Banks hold excess reserves, and the non-bank public typically also increases its holdings of a currency when its checkable account balances rise. So in this topic, we find out what happens to our account of the money supply process if we relax these assumptions. So the effect of increases in currency holdings and increases in checkable reserves. Let us try to make it a little bit easier. You can read this thing, and we just go and try to derive the realistic money multiplier. So we need this money multiplier, the small m, that links the monetary base B to the money supply M. So we have this simple equation: money supply is money multiplier times monetary base. So this equation tells us that the money multiplier is equal to the ratio of money supply to the monetary base. And we know that the money supply is the sum of currency C and checkable deposits D. While the monetary base is the sum of currency and the bank reserves R. What does it mean R? R is made with required reserves and excess reserves. So these are what we see. The R is RR and ER. This is reserves, this is currency, this is currency, this is deposits. So the whole formula transforms to this relation. Keep in mind that we are interested in the non-banks public desire to hold currency relative to checkable deposits, and banks desire to hold excess reserves relative to checkable deposits. And this drives us to capture the behavior in our expression for the money multiplier. We want to include this relation C over D, the currency to deposit relation. So let's see this currency to deposit relation in our equation. That means that measures the non-bank public's holdings of currency relative to the holdings of checkable deposits and the excess reserves to deposit ratio. The excess reserves to deposit ratio is ER over D. So to include these ratios in the expression for the money multiplier, we can rely on the basic rule of arithmetic that multiplying the numerator and denominator of a fraction by the same variable, it preserves the value of the fraction. So we can just introduce the deposit ratios into our expression for the money multiplier. This way, we just multiply it with the same amount. It is just 1. But this 1 over D comes in the numerator and comes that, and 1 over D comes in the denominator and changes in this way. So recall that the ratio of required reserves to checkable deposits is the required reserve ratio. Required reserve ratio, RR over D, this is RRD. And we can see this final expression for the money multiplier. So we can say that the money supply equals money multiplier times monetary base. Then we rearrange our expression with the term of monetary base, and we have the following formula just to calculate the money multiplier. And here's the example of how to do that. So if currency is 500 billion and deposits 1 trillion, required reserve ratio 10%, and excess reserves are 150 billion, then we can calculate the money multiplier by this way. C over D is 0.5. We divide 500 over 1,000, 0.5 over here and over here. Then excess reserves 150 divided by 1,000, this is 0.15. 10% stays over here, 0.1. So all in all, we have 2. And what it means, with a money multiplier of 2, every 1 billion increase in the monetary base will result in 2 billion increase in money supply. So pretty straightforward. Just you have the formula, you have some values. Just remember what CD, RD, ER means in this formula. This is the exact way of money multiplier, and don't forget about the monetary base here. So if B is 1 billion, so times 1, that means we end up with 2. This is 2 billion increase. What can we see from this kind of equation? Several points. Money supply will increase if either monetary base or the money multiplier increases, and CD goes to decline, RRD goes to decline, ERD goes to decline of monetary base. Why that? Because all these 3 values are inside the denominator, and if some value increases in denominator, the whole fraction decreases, and pretty straightforward. The logic is really, really basic. Okay. So what else can we say? We can think of the economists think of the monetary base as having 2 components. But before that, let's try to implement the formula. Let's try to calculate. So let's say I'll place values in chat. Consider the following information: bank reserves equal to 500, then currency equal to 400. Banks hold called 80 billion and RD are 0.1. So given this information, what is the value of money supply? What is the value of checkable deposits? Checkable deposits and M1 given this values. I have a couple of minutes to calculate that. Bank hold 80, that means required reserves. If ready, place the answer in chat. For those who are on YouTube, the task is you have to calculate the value of checkable deposits, and you have to calculate the value of money supply based on the following information: that bank reserves are 500 billion, currency 400 billion, required reserves 80, required reserve ratio 10%. Do you need more time? Place in chat, please. CDs are checkable deposits. Guys, anyone listening to me, please respond. Abraham. Abraham, wake up, don't sleep. Raven, how about you? Oh, everyone's sleeping. So for this kind, oh, calculated. Nice, nice. Okay. So for um, to implement this formula, you have to understand what will be the excess reserves. Excess reserves. The easiest part is the first question. What is checkable deposits? CD or just D in this case. Checkable deposits can be found from required reserves, and we know that required reserves are 80, and we know that the required reserve ratio is 10%. So D is 800, right? D is 800. 80 billion divided by 0.1 is 800. Next, we have to calculate the value of money supply. And I provide you different way of calculation, and you have to calculate it with this kind of formula. So different way of calculation, the money supply is currency plus checkable deposits. This is M equals C plus D. So M equals to 400 plus 800. This is 1 trillion 200 billion. And the monetary base is equal to the monetary base B equals to C plus R. And this is 400 plus 500. This is 900. And we instantly can calculate the money multiplier by dividing the M over B. And M is 1,200 divided by 900, and this is 1.30, 1.33 to be more specific. 133 is the money multiplier. So we answered all questions. The deposit value is 800. The M1 money supply 1 million to 1 trillion 200 billion. Monetary base 900. Value of money multiplier 133. So we can calculate the same thing using the formula of money multiplier. Money multiplier will be 400 in the numerator, 400 over 800 plus 1. This is and we then divide by that 400 times, no, not times, we divide by 800 plus 0.1 plus 420 120 or 800. So I think this will help, and this will be 133. Like that. So in the numerator we'll have 1.5, in the denominator we'll have 1.125. And that's it. The two approaches end up to the same amount. Checkable deposits 800, instantly calculating M1 money supply, instantly calculating the money multiplier is the same based on both methods of calculating 133. So why excess reserves are 420? Because we have the bank reserves which are 500, and we have the required reserves 80. So the difference 420 is placed in this ER. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to grasp this formula and successfully implement it. All right, next, we have the monetary base, which comprises of two components, B non and BR. The BR also is the another name for discount loans. That means we will multiply not by B, but we'll multiply by this sum of B non and BR. And we now have a complete description of the money supply process. The money supply equals the monetary base times the money multiplier. The monetary base equals the non-borrowed base, which is determined primarily by the Fed through open market operations and by discount loans, which are also determined jointly by banks and the Fed. The money multiplier depends on the required reserve ratio determined by the Fed, the ratio of excess reserves to deposits determined by banks, this value determined by banks, and the currency to deposit ratio, which is determined by the non-bank public, by households and firms. So we have come to the end. If P non increases, the Fed, based on the actions of the Fed through open market operation, it increases the money supply because the monetary base increases. The same kind of thing is PR reserves also go up, the whole thing go up. Required reserves CD and ER or D, they decrease. Money multiplier if they increase because they are in denominator, and hopefully this whole thing is will be established. And later on, maybe in macroeconomics, I'll show you what happened during financial crisis. What happened with the money supply, money multiplier, monetary base, how they responded to these values, and generally the effect of rising of increasing the money supply through open market operations was not that successful, but still 5 times increase in the assets of central bank is quite great. But the same kind of thing you can imagine what happened during the recession of 1937-1938, where in August 1936 the Fed begins increase the required reserve ratio, and in May the Fed increases the required reserve ratio, and after it ends, instantly the recession of 1937-1938 comes, and the excess reserves of banks rose to rose in several times, maybe in 3 times at that period. All in all, what have you understood? What have you have to understand from this kind of lecture? That uh, the money multiplier is a really important thing in economics. It can really change how the money supply will eventually be. You have to understand that there is a special lag when the Fed decides to have the certain interest rate in the economy. It changes the monetary base. This monetary base comes to the economy through discount loans or through open market operations. And after some time, the banks and non-bank public, they decide what will happen then. And of course, in ideal situations, if customers, if banks spend all the reserves, all the checkable deposits they have, then the money multiplier will be the same as the required reserves. So if 0 0.1 required reserves, then the money multiplier will be 10, and it will be much higher. But regularly, it won't be that much. And if 10% required reserves, it will be 5 is a really great option. But many people will prefer just to hold currency, not just spending all the currency they have. The same kind of happening with the banks. They might choose not to place the whole excess reserves to the market. They can hold some of them. And also, what else? These deposit creations, the three types of loans, how the T accounts please review how T accounts responds to that. Understand what assets and liabilities for the banking system from Federal Reserve, from the non-bank public, how they change through T accounts. This is really important. Uh, this is the comprising of the sequence of events, how we change the reserves in one asset, and this is the liability in the Federal Reserve, and so on and so forth, how this interacts. Just look through the slides. Hopefully everything was pretty clear. Have a grasp that the major categories of the liabilities and assets in the Federal Reserve balance sheet, it generally stays pretty much the same in relation in percentage values. These values stands the same. So if someone asks you what are the major assets and the major liabilities of the Fed, you can answer based on this kind of slide. And hopefully that's it. This is the money supply process. Next week, we are going to have practice, just discuss some points, some key terms, solve problems. And for now, you have to do the data lab, 4 tasks in there, because recently we haven't got much homework. So hopefully everything will be fine. Thank you all for watching. I'll place these videos as soon as possible to YouTube. See you tomorrow in microeconomics. Bye.